Welcome to the InfoSec Insider podcast, brought to you by URM, the UK's leading information and cybersecurity specialists.
Hi, my name's Annie and I'm here today with Chris Heighes, who's one of our senior consultants here at URM. Welcome to another episode of InfoSec Insider. So Chris and I are going to be discussing the Digital Operations Resilience Act today, or also known as DORA. So my first question for you, Chris, is a pretty straightforward one. What is DORA?
Okay, hello everybody. Essentially, DORA is a piece of European legislation related to financial institutions. Historically, financial institutions have sort of managed resilience in terms of financial aspects. So they've held capital so that they've been able to withstand sort of economic upturns and downturns. And that's really what they've seen as being their organizational resilience. That obviously doesn't cover resilience related to information security and communications technology incidents and issues. So essentially what DORA is looking to ensure is that financial institutions have capabilities to protect, detect, contain, recover and repair from ICT related incidents. So that's essentially what the Act is about.
Amazing, thank you, Chris. So who or which entities are in scope for the Act?
Yeah, and that's a good question, because at URM, one of the most frequent questions we've had related to DORA has been, are we in scope for it? Is it something that we should be worried about or needing to be compliant to? Essentially, as I sort of I said earlier, it relates to financial institutions that are doing business in Europe. The actual Act lists in quite detailed terms exactly who's in scope. It's types of organizations such as payment institutions, organizations involved in credit management, insurance companies, credit rating companies. And probably the long and the short of it is that if you as an organization have to be registered with a financial authority in Europe, it's quite likely that you're going to be in scope for this Act. Now, the Act legally comes into force on January the 17th this year. So it's quite likely that if you are going to be required to be compliant to it, the authority that you're registered to would have already talked to you about this and made it clear what their expectations are. And that comes down to the fact that the way this Act is going to be implemented and enforced is via the competent authorities in each country, so i.e. the financial authorities in each country. And to give you an example of that, in Germany, my understanding of what the key sort of competent authority there is that it's BaFin, who are the Federal Financial Supervisory Authority. So that's really the mechanism of how it's going to work. So fundamentally, if you're a financial institution that's doing business in Europe and you need to be authorized to do that with a specific authority within one of those countries. The other major group that's also involved in this is third-party service providers of information or communication services. And again, this has worried a number of organizations who provide services to financial institutions, worrying about whether they need to be in scope as well, whether they're in scope of the standard as well. Now, in actual fact, really, the understanding at the moment is that DORA is only going to be applicable to major third-party service providers. So basically, service providers who are providing fundamental significant services to multiple financial institutions across Europe. So the way I've tended to pitch this is it's data center providers, it's people like Microsoft Azure, AWS. It's those third-party service providers who, if they experienced a significant outage or information security incident, have the potential to impact financial institutions across Europe. So it doesn't necessarily really apply to smaller organisations that are maybe providing specific services to one or two financial institutions.
So how does DORA differ from something like to ISO 27001?
It's, to a certain extent, it's a standard answer whenever we talk about any of the more specific information security acts or standards. ISO 27001 is a information security baseline standard. So if you've already got that, it gives you a good starting point to be compliant to the requirements of DORA. The difference between the two is that DORA has some much more specific requirements within it. And probably the best way to explain that is to sort of talk about the fact that essentially DORA is structured around 5 pillars. The first of which is ICT risk management and governance, which very much ties into the same space as ISO 27001. It's expecting you to be doing risk assessments. It's expecting you to understand what your critical assets are and what the vulnerabilities and threats associated with those assets are. And also that you've got a set of information security controls that are protecting those assets. So very much in a similar sort of space to ISO 27001. DORA has some specific requirements, whereas ISO 27001 has to be sort of fairly generic in terms of what it talks about. DORA is able to be a bit more specific in some particular areas around exactly how you do risk management and governance. The next pillar is incident reporting, specifically ICT related incident reporting. DORA there is very specific about how you should be reporting any significant incidents that you experience to your financial authorities. So it's very specific about when you do the reporting, how you do the reporting, and to who you do the reporting. So it has the same sort of expectations generally as ISO 27001 around exactly how you should be doing incident management, but it's got very specific requirements around reporting. The third pillar is essentially digital operational resilience testing. Now, I think everybody knows that ISO 27001 talks about the fact that you need to be doing testing for disaster recovery and business continuity. DORA, again, is a lot more specific about exactly what it expects to have in place. And essentially, it goes into quite a lot of detail around the concept of threat-led penetration testing, which is quite detailed and in-depth methodologies for actually doing resilience testing and penetration testing. So again, a little bit like the incident reporting piece, the fundamentals are similar to ISO 27001, but DORA is going into much more detail about what it's expecting you to be doing. The fourth pillar is third-party risk. Again, similar sort of positioning here. DORA expects organisations to know who their significant third parties are, to do risk assessments associated with those third parties. But again, DORA is very specific about how it wants you to detail, categorise, and manage your third party suppliers and the risks that they potentially present to you as an organisation. And then finally, the fourth pillar, which is a little bit more of an optional pillar at the moment, is around information sharing. So it's around financial institutions across Europe being able to have some formal methods for sharing information about potential threats or issues they've had, incidents they've had, and how they've been able to respond to them. So that's quite a long answer to the question. The short answer is that ISO 27000 is the benchmark. DORA builds on that with some more specific requirements, particularly in the areas of incident reporting, resilience testing, and third-party risk management.
No, that makes sense. And what are the timelines for implementation of DORA, and how's it going to be enforced?
Yep. it comes into force legally. It comes into force on January the 17th this year, so essentially now. And again, organisations that the financial authorities are expecting to be compliant to it should already have had messages telling them that this is the case and what they need to do about it. The way it's going to be enforced, as I briefly already mentioned, the expectation is the competent authorities in each country, or the competent authority in each country. So typically the key financial authorities in each EU country are responsible for enforcing the Act. So really that comes down to they're responsible for identifying the financial institutions that need to be compliant to the Act, and then running the processes to manage that enforcement. Now, because it hasn't really, January the 17th is the date that it actually goes formally live, we've not seen any specific examples of exactly how it's going to be enforced in practice. But it is worth noting that if you run through the Act, there are some clauses which talk about the fact that financial institutions need to be in a position whereby they can provide the financial authorities, so the competent authorities rather, with a report, quite a detailed report of their operational resilience status. Something, I mean, this isn't completely true, but something akin to a SOC 2 type report is the way I've sort of seen that positioned. So I think organisations need to be aware that if they are going to be required to be compliant to DORA, there may well be a knock on the door at some point from their relevant competent authority saying, okay, we need evidence, and we need evidence in quite a structured manner of how you're compliant to the Act.
Amazing, thank you, Chris. How's that going to work, the reporting? Is that something that the authorities are going to do with organisations they suspect may not be compliant, or is it going to be done at random, or is there just no knowing at this point?
Very good question. I don't know at the moment, and I'm not sure anybody is completely clear about exactly how this is going to work. In practice, the expectation would probably be that it will be the larger financial institutions that are going to be the first ones that are going to be challenged about this, and then as you suggested, organisations which potentially have been subjected to significant information security incidents or have had specific issues in that space, the expectation would be that the competent authorities would potentially move down and target those types of organisation as well. So yeah, I'm not sure it's entirely clear at the moment exactly what the reporting process will be. There's nothing in DORA that is, unlike ISO 27001, where it's clear that you're going to have a 3-year certification and that you're going to have annual audits. It feels like it might be a little bit more reactive, certainly initially with DORA, in terms of how the enforcement will actually happen.
Thank you so much for your time today, Chris. And for any listeners that want to learn a little bit more about DORA, Chris has written a really great blog that's on our website, urmconsulting.com, that is called the Digital Operations Resilience Act, which goes into lots of detail about DORA, its requirements, etc. So do go and check that out, and thank you very much for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we would really appreciate it if you could spare a moment to leave a rating or review at ratethispodcast.com/InfoSec Insider. To listen to more episodes, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and Podbean.
Thank you for listening to URM's InfoSec Insider podcast. For more information, visit our website at urmconsulting.com.